Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, or good night, whatever it is, whatever time you are watching this video. I hope all of you are having an amazing and wonderful time today. And I appreciate y'all coming to this video for y'all's, to be entertained, of course. I appreciate that y'all want to listen to my random ramblings, which I think is cool. But as you saw in today's video title, today we are going to be discussing live action adaptations that I personally think should have been remade into animated form. Now, of course, these are my opinions. You can agree with me or you can disagree with me. It's a free country. You can do as you please. And I just want to emphasize something real quick before I get started. I don't necessarily hate the live action adaptations per se. The ones I'm going to be discussing today, I would say I love most of them. If anything, it's just that I just would have preferred the animated route. Like I would have preferred I would have liked to go the animated route rather than the live action route. But does the live action suck per se? No, not really. And everyone's different. Some people say, oh, I want live action, or some people say, oh, I want animated, or some people want both, which is fine. And of course, spoilers ahead, but these are really old films and, book adaptations, so I think you'll be fine when it comes to spoilers. But without further ado, let's get started. And then this is probably where I'm gonna cut. I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna edit my videos or not. They might be raw, they might not. So, the first franchise I'm going to be picking is Harry Potter. Okay? Now, I think this is probably the biggest contender on my list, as well as a lot of other people's list. Because Harry Potter is just something really, really special. And fun fact, by the way, I actually just became a Harry Potter fan maybe in the last year. It was last year. Because I remember being fairly hype for Hogwarts Legacy. And in March of 2022, I believe, they had released a state of play of Hogwarts Legacy. And I was so excited for the game that I decided to watch the Harry Potter films. And as I was progressing, I just started loving them more and more. And then eventually I just, started watching YouTube videos about, the Harry Potter lore, James, I think that's his name, right? Harry Potter's dad, like James Group, the Mordors, or I don't know how you pronounce it. Excuse me. But regardless, it's really, really cool, right? So, I'll say this before I, go any further. But one of the most interesting things about Hollywood and about adaptations is I always wonder how studios go about deciding like, oh, this should be live action, or oh, this should be animated, right? And I think the best example I can think of is Invincible and The Boys, because both of these projects are on Amazon, and both of these projects have they're adapted from comics, right? So I always wondered, how come with The Boys they were like, oh, we're gonna do this live action, but then with Invincible they were like, oh, we're gonna do this animated. And it works well for both franchises because The Boys is obviously really, really popular, and you have actors such as Carl Urban and Anthony Starr who absolutely kill it in their roles. But then you also have Invincible, and because it's animated, it's pretty much on par with the comics, because it's like, wow, you're literally reading the comics, except you're watching it in an animated form, And then because it's animated, they have more leverage, right? Because either A, they can make it more like the comics, and they really just need to rely on the voices, because it's always easier to mimic a voice rather than mimic a persona, right? Because whenever you adapt something from a book, it's really hard to capture that actual like it's challenging to find an actor that looks exactly like the comic book character, because it's almost impossible that you're gonna find that. But obviously you're gonna find something that closely resembles that character, right? And then it makes me think, like, in the future, would we ever get a Boys adaptation in the comic book style, and would we ever see an Invincible live action series? Who knows? But that's the case with Harry Potter, right? Because with Harry Potter, they decided that the films were going to be live action. And then just recently, because it's currently August 2023, so just recently, back in maybe April, I want to say April or May, I'm not certain, but HBO Max is being rebranded into Max, and Warner Brothers obviously needed a lot of new fresh content for Max. So they decided, hey, let's reboot Harry Potter and let's make it into a TV series, because that was a lot of fans' request, right? Because even though the films are awesome, with film, each film is a good, 2 hours and something minutes. So you don't have that much leverage for, what's it called, for book lore. Like you don't like it. You can't really make it as canon as possible or as accurate as possible, right? So fans are like, fans think, oh, we need a series, because then one season can have 8 to 10 episodes, and each episode can be roughly 40 minutes to an hour, which would give them more leverage to make it more accurate to the books, right? So they announced the series, but then they say it's going to be live action. And whenever I heard that announcement, I was pretty hype. I was like, okay, this is exciting, because again, I just got into Harry Potter, right? So it's not necessarily like that big of a deal to me as, say, an OG fan, but I do think it's a bit soon, considering Fantastic Beasts, like that came out, I think 2022 or 2021, I don't remember exactly. But obviously that franchise failed, so I think that's why they were so, they weren't hesitating to like quickly just reboot the entire franchise. But I'm not gonna lie, I started thinking about it and I started realizing that I think this can benefit more as an animated series. Now, am I still excited for the live action series? Of course I am. But I truly, truly wish and hope that at some point in the future, we have some sort of Harry Potter animated adaptation. Because think about it, right? Really, really think about it. And this is going to be the same case for everything I say moving forward, like with every other franchise. But when it comes to Harry Potter, you look at the book covers and you see that unique art style. Imagine that art style being transitioned into a 2D animation in the sense of, Across the Spider-Verse or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like the new film with Seth Rogen. Imagine, or even just having a Harry Potter series in the sense of Pixar style, or Disney style, or DreamWorks style. How beautiful would that be? Because then not only like would it just be beautiful, but it would also just give the creators more leverage. Because once again, when you're doing live action, occasionally you have setbacks, right? Like Marvel, or not Marvel, but just in general, like this is a perfect example. Well, actually, I am gonna use Marvel. So Miss Marvel, the character Kamala Khan, she has stretchy powers, right? She can stretch like Mr. Fantastic. Now, in Multiverse of Madness, they still gave Mr. Fantastic his stretchy powers. So I don't know if they just wanted to differentiate these two characters, but a lot of people were saying that the main reason why they changed her powers to be more cosmetic or more magic, like it's pure magic, is because in live action, it would look really goofy, because in the comics, she always makes her hands like super big and she makes herself really lanky. But if you transition that to live action, it just wouldn't have the same effect. It would look goofy. And it doesn't matter how much money or how much CGI you put into it, it's just not going to look crisp. That's another case with Harry Potter, because I feel as though some of the magical aspects of Harry Potter can be more attributed, like it can be accommodated for with animation. Because with animation, you have more leverage, you have more freedom, you can be more creative, But overall, Harry Potter would just be so awesome to see as an animated adaptation. And again, am I hyped for the Max live action series? Absolutely. Especially the fact that it's a TV show and we're under the impression that's going to be very high budget. But man, I just hope at some point down the line we see some sort of animated Harry Potter. It doesn't even have to be the mainline series, even though I would prefer that. But even if they just make a spin-off, like, James and this group, and they made it animated, that would make me happy. Because then it's like, okay, we get to see Hogwarts animated. That's awesome. Okay. So moving forward, and by the way, I don't think this is in any particular order, but Harry Potter was definitely on top of my list for live actions that should be animated. But for my next spot on the list, okay, is going to be The Walking Dead. All right. Now, The Walking Dead originally started as a comic book series. And man, at one point, AMC's Walking Dead was so popular. Holy moly. It was absolutely mainstream because I remember being in junior high, and this was the arc where the characters were in prison. They were in the prison, and they were the antagonist was the governor, right? I remember when the governor died, everyone talked about it. They were like, "Oh my god, the governor died." Like, holy shit, that was badass. Like, everyone was like going crazy about the series. And at the time, I wasn't a Walking Dead fan, so I kind of I low-key felt left out because I just didn't know what no one was talking about. And naturally, when I started watching Walking Dead, I had gotten spoiled because I already knew what was going to happen. But the same thing with Glenn's fake death, and the same thing with Negan. Everyone was just talking about it. Like, even my teachers would talk about it. Like, that's how big The Walking Dead was. So it's just so weird to think that at one point it was the biggest show to ever exist, because now I feel like most of their fans left after season 8. And I just find this so funny to think about, because all those people that were talking about it at my school, I promise you most of them stopped watching. And here's me, a newbie, a newbie fan, and I'm over here still catching up on the seasons, which I think is hilarious. But as of right now, the series finished, and I think it barely finished last fall, so fall of 2022. And I thought the ending was cool since, Andrew Lincoln came back as Rick. By the way, Andrew Lincoln is very, very, very underrated. I have no idea why he's not a top actor, because he is insane. And I really, really love his performance as Rick. Especially his accent. Like, it's crazy to think he's British, because he just portrays the American accent so well. But as I stated, The Walking Dead initially started as a comic book series, right? And it has a very distinctive comic book style. It's always black and white, and it looks really, really gritty, but it looks really, really awesome, right? And there's actually another reason why I'm gonna say, I would want The Walking Dead to be a animated adaptation, which I'm going to get into a sec. But The Walking Dead has just such a cool comic book style that it just screams for it to be animated. It just screams for it to be animated. And, once again, for those of you who don't know, the legend behind The Walking Dead is Robert Kirkman. And Robert Kirkman is such a great storyteller because the fact that he came up with the whole Negan arc is just crazy because it's so rich in story development. But he also created Marvel Zombies, so he has a lot, of inspiration. He kind of made, I wouldn't say he made zombies mainstream or, walkers, but he definitely kind of popularized it, I would say, But he also created Invincible, and wouldn't you know it, Invincible is animated, right? Now, of course, Invincible and The Walking Dead are owned by two different corporations, Invincible being Amazon Prime and The Walking Dead being AMC. So I think it's really up to AMC to decide whether or not The Walking Dead gets an animated adaptation unless a contract ends. But I don't know if they're under a contract or not. For all I know, AMC can just permanently own The Walking Dead. Or maybe they just own the series, but Robert Kirkman is still free to do whatever he wants with The Walking Dead IP, right? But so not only would it just be really, really cool just to have an animated Walking Dead show in the sense of the comic book style, but another main attribute as to why I think The Walking Dead should be animated, right, is because it would be more comic book accurate to the comics than to the than the show was, right? Because for those of you who don't know, either you watch Walking Dead and you're not into the comics, or you don't know what I'm talking about. The Walking Dead TV series, from the source material, is very, very different. It is very different. There's little to none similarities between the comics and the show because they're just so different. And the show does things better than the comics, but then the comics does things better than the show. And honestly, this can be its whole own video because that's how diverse it is. But one of the main attributes of, I'm just going to throw some quick, quips. Daryl and Merle, but more importantly, Daryl was never in the comics. Crazy, right? He was never in the comics. He was never a part of it. How crazy is that? Because he's such an important character in the series, and Norman Reedus plays him perfectly, that you would think, oh, he's from the comics, but he's not. He's not from the comics. That's crazy. And then, of course, you have Carl dying, which I think was a big disappointment, just because in the comics, Carl kind of takes over as the protagonist after Rick dies. And I like how they set up, Carl, eventually, because Carl grew up in the apocalypse, right? He didn't really have a normal childhood. So, he was always an interesting character for that reason. So for the show to kill him off was just a bad idea, right? But then you also just have, other aspects, like in the comics, Andrea is a way bigger character than she is in the show. But Michonne just kind of takes over. I was doing this because there's an important scene in the comics, and I think it happens in the show. But in the comics, Andrea is sniping, and I'm pretty sure it's during the Whisper arc where she snipes Beta or something. But Michonne takes over that role instead. And then obviously Michonne takes over being Rick's love interest, whilst in the comics, Andrea was Rick's love interest, right? But you also have instances where the show does better than the comics. For instance, in the comics, Rick loses his right or left hand really, really early on in the series because the governor basically cuts it off. So for the entire series, Rick doesn't have a hand. And Robert Kirkman has actually came out and he's actually stated that he really, really, that's one of his biggest regrets with the comics is cutting off Rick's hand, because Rick is the protagonist of The Walking Dead. So moving forward, he was just met with a lot of challenges, like, oh, how would Rick get out of this situation, or how would Rick go about doing this, because he has a disadvantage, obviously. Another instance is Carol. Now, I do like how the comics portrayed Carol, because I think it was an interesting plot line. But essentially, in the comics, Carol is really, really weird, okay? Because she comes up to Lori and she suggests that they should be in a poly relationship with Rick, and Lori denies her about it. But whenever Carol is asking Lori about it, she seems like super obsessive. Like, it's not just like a casual, like, oh, hey, we should be in a poly. Like, no. Like, she was like giving off like creepy, unsettling vibes. So then that depresses her so much that she kills herself by going to the fence, because this was during the prison arc, and she voluntarily gets bitten by a walker. But in the panel, it shows that she's clearly like getting off on it, and I'm just like, okay. Like, I remember being so shocked, because I was like, wow, this is not Carol at all. Because obviously Carol in the TV series is such a badass. It's like, wow, this is a badass character, you know? But, I'm going off on the tangent. The main idea is with an animated series, they can definitely be way more comic accurate. They can be more accurate to the source material than the live action show ever was. Because once again, the live action series was very, very, very different from the comics. Like, I think this is one of the most changed aspects in an adaptation, because it's so different from the comics. And the comics is honestly a really good story, other things too, like Tyrese is a way bigger character. Dale's a badass. Like, he's an actual badass. The governor is way more sadistic in the fucking comics. Like, holy shit. Like, he even made me cuss just thinking about it. Because, the governor in the show is pretty bad, but in the comics, it's like, whoa, that is a whole, Like to this day, he's probably the most messed up villain in The Walking Dead. Like, especially in the comics. Like, it's just bad. But see what I mean? Like, it would be great for an animated show. So please, 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 AMC or Amazon or Robert Kirkman, please, please, please make a Walking Dead animated series, not only in the comic book style, but also just more accurate to the comics. I promise y'all it would be successful. So that's going to be it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. I know I just talked about 2 projects, but I think I'm going to do a part 2 rather than just making it one video altogether. So that way, you know, I can have more content spread out. But thank you all for y'all's time. I truly appreciate